So while most of them may not be the scariest horror games out there, horror platformers feature some of the most interesting stories and eerie atmospheres. Then when you add in the unique perspective that these games feature, it's a nice change from your typical survival horror or action horror games. Actually, the funniest thing about horror platformers is that most of them appear to have a family-friendly style, but when you actually dive into them, they're anything but. So on the 16th day of the 31 days of Halloween, we're taking a look at my favorite horror platformers of all time. As always, I only feature one game per franchise. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, this video is officially sponsored by G Fuel, so if you're looking for ways to support the channel, consider picking up your favorite type of G Fuel using the link below or the code NerdSpaceGames at checkout to save up to 20% off your next order. Anyway, my name is Ruben with NerdSpace Games, and here are the top 10 best horror puzzle platformers of all time. Let's get it. Number 10, Typoman. A game with monsters and puzzles built around the alphabet may not seem like your typical horror game, but as with just every other entry on today's list, don't let that cover fool you. Typoman takes place in some sort of apocalyptic world in which everything is made up of letters. This means that you'll need to use letters to solve puzzles and defeat monsters that, you guessed it, are kind of made up of letters. Ever heard of the phrase, words can never hurt you? Yeah, that's not the case here at all, as this game centers around how powerful and scary words can be, and one thing is for certain when it comes to Typoman, these words cut deep. Throughout the game, you'll need to rearrange letters to create words that'll create actions based on the words you make. For example, you want to make the elevator go up, you spell up. You want to power up a generator or something else, spell on. Obviously, there's a lot more to the game than that, but as the story goes on, you can't help but embrace the uniqueness of this horror platformer, even as the story gets darker and darker as you go on. Number 9, Carrion. Speaking of dark storylines, Carrion is a horror platformer that takes on the unique approach of having you play as the monster or villain of the game. From the moment the game starts, you play as some sort of parasitic alien-like creature that destroys and devours anything that gets in its way. This can come in the form of walls and barriers, or on a much darker note, people. To emphasize how dark this game is, in order to gain more health, you must eat the people that you come across, which in turn gives you more life. Along the way, you learn different abilities that allow you to travel to different areas in the game, but as you do this, you can't help feel a little bad about killing scientists and random people running for their lives. Yeah, it's kind of a dark horror puzzle platformer, but it's one that definitely feels a lot different than your traditional game in this genre. Number 8, Flicker of Hope. The best part about Flicker of Hope is that it's completely free on Steam right now. Yeah, that's right. You can play Flicker of Hope right now on Steam for free. Sure, it's nowhere near as long as most of the entries on today's list, and compared to some of the other platformers above it on today's list, it's not very lore driven, nor does it have a very impactful story. However, Flicker of Hope is just a traditional, fun, down-to-earth horror platformer that makes your skin crawl from start to finish. You play as a candlewick that is trying to carry out its master's final mission. Only things are a little harder than it seems, as there appears to be a nun that has some sort of plague, and she will stop at nothing to put your light out, therefore killing you. So the goal is to avoid her, light other wicks to create checkpoints for yourself, and avoid the plague-infested creatures, while also making your way to the end of the game to carry out your master's dying wish. Again, it's nothing mind-blowing, but if you love horror platformers and you love free, which who doesn't love free games, then yeah, Flicker of Hope is a must-play for sure. Number 7, Creepy Tale, Some Other Place. The Creepy Tale series is one of the most underrated horror franchises out there. This incredible franchise is full of thrilling and dark takes on your favorite fairy tales, and honestly, I don't think there's a single game in this franchise that I dislike. However, if I was gonna pick one game in the series to represent this franchise for this list, then it's gotta be Creepy Tale, Some Other Place. This entry follows a young boy who finds himself in another world with dwarves, gremlins, a witch, and much more. The boy must interact with these fairy tale creatures to find a way back home, while also trying to save a young girl who was captured by some strange cult. A majority of this game, like most horror platformers, you are left defenseless and must rely on stealth and traps to take out the enemies. It's a really fun game with a really creative take on some of our favorite fairy tales, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Hansel and Gretel, I think. Number 6, By Sweet Carole. One of my most anticipated horror games of the year was By Sweet Carole, and while I was slightly disappointed in the game, it's still a relatively great horror platformer and definitely deserving of a spot on today's list. What I love about this game specifically is the uniqueness it brings to the table. Other horror puzzle platformers found ways to bring mature themes to children's fairy tales and stories, but By Sweet Carole went a step farther with it, as it also took inspiration from Disney animation specifically. The best way to describe the aesthetics of this game is to picture Snow White or Alice in Wonderland with a similar animation style of those films as well, but instead give it a dark and mature theme and story to it. That's what Sweet Carole is on the surface. Now gameplay wise, it does struggle in comparison to some of the higher platformers on today's list, but it also shines in new and unique ways. I, for one, really enjoy the ability to change back and forth between a bunny to solve puzzles, and I also like the design of each of the enemy types that you come across in this game. Sweet Carole also features some puzzle solving and backtracking with key items that kind of gave off survival horror vibes to a much smaller extent. It's a great game, and if you're a fan of horror puzzle platformers, especially if you enjoy the Creepy Tales series, then there's a solid chance that you'll appreciate this game a lot, and I highly recommend it that you give it a shot. Number 5, DARQ. The boy wakes up in a creepy house. Moving down a little bit, the boy finds a bed, and when he sleeps on this bed, he enters a different dream world each time. This boy, Lloyd, must go in and out of these different dreams, face different nightmares, solve different puzzles, and look deep inside of each dream to decipher exactly what these dreams mean and why is he here. Each world feels different from the rest, with there being a subway world, a hospital world, and other unique environments. My favorite part about DARQ is the way that you actually explore these worlds. Lloyd has this ability to walk up walls and get different perspectives that allow him to see ways to solve puzzles from a different view. You can also change angles to get access to new pathways and use these abilities to avoid some of the disturbing monsters of the game. I also really like the ending of the game, as without spoiling anything of course, it makes you think about what everything meant up until this point. DARQ might be a short game, but it's one that's definitely worth your time and money, especially if you love dark and gloomy settings in your horror platformers, but with a unique perspective. Number 4, Inside. Inside follows a young boy in the middle of some sort of strange experiment. After escaping, everybody is out to catch this boy, and he must use his wits to keep one step ahead of the threats that follow him. This is one of those games where the less I say, the better. What I can say though is that the game features gameplay mechanics that involve you taking a different look at the puzzles that you encounter. Most of them will challenge you to use other people around you to create new pathways or view things from a different angle. As time goes on, you start to learn more and more about this DARQ project, and trust me, I don't think it's something that you or anyone can predict. Let's just say that the final act might feel a little familiar to something else on this list, and I'll leave it at that. Number 3, Bramble, the Mountain King. Like Creepy Tales, Bramble is a game that centers around dark fairy tales, or at least in the case of this game, it's based on Nordic folk tales. You play as a young boy who travels across Bramble in order to rescue his sister. Along the way, the boy comes across some terrifying creatures, all which appear to want him dead. From avoiding being cooked alive to facing a water spirit that honestly might be one of the scariest looking monsters in a horror game, Bramble has a ton of horrifying creatures to keep you on your toes. Something else that I really like about Bramble that I don't think it gets enough credit for is the way that you deal with most of these monsters. Usually in horror platformers, you just run away or avoid the monsters trying to kill you until something kills them or wards them off for good. In the case of Bramble though, you actually get some pretty creative ways of dealing with some of the creatures in this game. The one that comes to mind first is the seductive forest spirit boss fight. Either way, Bramble is one of the perfect examples of a game being completely different than you might expect. This game looks charming and innocent at first, with a young boy and his sister interacting with gnome-like creatures and other adorable animals, only to then take a drastic turn and get dark, real fast. Number 2, Limbo. Limbo follows a young boy. Okay, wait a second. I'm starting to notice a trend now with horror platformers. Why are we always playing as a young boy in these horrifying circumstances? Like, why does this keep happening? Anyway, Limbo follows a nameless boy who wakes up in some sort of, well, limbo, and he must move through this dark world full of shadows to reunite with his sister. Along the way, the nameless boy comes across other shadows that are honestly kind of a pain in the ass. Most notably is the spider silhouette. Anybody that saw my video on the scariest spiders in horror games will know that this spider scares me more than any other spider in a horror game. I feel like its movements and sounds combined with the eerie atmosphere of Limbo just scares the living hell out of me. Anyway, the game is similar to other horror platformers like Inside and DARQ, in which the player will need to avoid traps and solve puzzles to move forward. Above all though, Limbo has one of the deepest, most emotional, and most impactful stories in all of horror games, despite there being no dialogue at all. Yeah, especially that final scene, I just can't. Go play this game right now, even if you're not a massive fan of platformers, and then hit me up in the comments and let me know what you thought about the ending. Number 1, Little Nightmares 2. I mean, I can't imagine doing a list for the best horror platformers and not featuring a Little Nightmares game as my favorite game of that genre. Don't get me wrong, I love every single game on this list, all of which I would argue are worth at least one playthrough. However, the Little Nightmares series just goes above and beyond in every aspect of the game. Specifically, Little Nightmares 2 is my favorite game of the franchise for multiple reasons. For one, the monster designs are better in my opinion. The teacher is without a doubt one of the most horrifying monster designs in a horror game, and even the doctor and his mannequin-like patients are just fucking creepy. The relationship between Mono and Six and their story from start to finish is another thing that I really liked about this game. In fact, the story here is much more interesting and more impactful than the first game, and even features a twist that I would argue is one of, if not the best twist in a horror game in my opinion. All in all, Little Nightmares 2 is hard to beat, and while Little Nightmares 3 was a great successor to that game, and I definitely appreciated the co-op aspect of that game, Little Nightmares 2 still has a special place in my heart as my favorite horror puzzle platformer of all time. But that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Do you think Little Nightmares 2 is the best horror puzzle platformer, or do you think a different game deserves that title? Also, what do you think of the new entries in this genre, like Little Nightmares 3 and by Sweet Carole? Finally, are you excited for Reanimal that's coming out in 2026, early 2026 I believe, and based on what you've seen so far from that game, do you think it'll crack this list when it releases? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.